The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, good morning. My name is Johanna Nelson, and I am with the New Mexico Economic Development Department, and I'm a finance development specialist here with the department, and we want to thank you for joining us today. This is a really exciting webinar. Today we're joined by representatives from the New Mexico Finance Authority, and we are sharing this webinar from Santa Fe today. This is a webinar that is part of our monthly webinar series that we host monthly, and we share information about development finance tools, development finance topics. We've covered a lot of different topics and in organizations. That's why New Mexico Finance Authority is here today. So you can ask questions, learn more, hear directly from the representatives from the organization. So I do want to share with you that we will be recording this session, and this will be available on our YouTube playlist, which you can access if you just Google New Mexico Economic Development Department. You will be able to find it, and you can see all of our previous topics there. We will send the presentation out after the webinar, and I do want to reiterate, feel free to ask questions as we go along. We'll be taking questions throughout and at the end as well. So before we get started, I did want to share a little bit about the New Mexico Economic Development Department of Finance team. We provide a variety of services here in the department. We can do financial packaging, analysis, provide financial resource assistance, but a lot of what we do is play matchmaker or connect businesses and communities with financial resources. So that's why we work really closely with NMFA. They're a really great partner that we can recommend to businesses and communities. We do have several programs that we manage here in the department, and that is included on this slide. You see Local Economic Development Act, otherwise known as NMEDA, our Fund It program. We work with NMFA to look at new markets tax credits, our New Mexico Collateral Assistance Program. We have a Rural Efficient Business Program, and then also we are managing the state's initiative for Opportunity Zones. So if you have any questions on those, feel free to follow up with us, and we'll get you more information about that. A little bit of background about Fund It. This is an interagency group that addresses financing questions from communities, and now we're expanding into businesses. But for the last couple of years, we've really been focused on how can we bring different organizations and funding entities together at the same table to address questions about how do I pay for this project. And NMFA participates in that group. John participates. And basically what happens is at those meetings, a community can present their idea. Maybe it's a redevelopment project, or we actually had a meeting yesterday, and we heard from a community that is looking for a new lift station, which involves sewer lines in their industrial park. So they present their project, and then we get feedback from funding entities about if it's a fit for their program, or we get recommendations and brainstorming ideas from the different entities about where to go for funding sources. So really valuable meeting and group, so I'd encourage you to participate in that. As I mentioned, we're expanding to small businesses, and continuing with that mission of how can we connect small businesses to financing. And we're going to be doing a series of finance fairs across the state. Our first one is in Taos, July 17th. So if you are a business interested in financing in the Taos North Central region, come on up. It'll be at the Monte Sagrado in Taos, July 17th. So it's free. You do need to register, and we'll send you out the link too. A resource within Funded is this resource map. You can go to our website and find this, and basically hopefully our intention is that this distills a lot of the financing resources that are available, and it distills them by categories. So if you have a community development component to a project, or you're looking for business resources, housing, infrastructure, planning, transportation, water, all of the major components to economic development and community development projects, you can click through and find relevant funding sources. So you'd be able to find all eligible and applicable loans and or grants and programs too. We have some resources listed. So utilize this, and then when we send this link out, this will have the link that you can directly apply to Funded. But Funded's worth mentioning because it is a part of this webinar series to get information out to communities and businesses about where to go for funding. Without further delay, I want to go ahead and introduce the NMFA team. And I think, Zach, are you starting?
Yes.
Yes, okay. All right, take it away.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for giving us your attention and interest in what programs that we have to provide. My name is Zach Dillenbach. I'm the Chief Lending Officer with the New Mexico Finance Authority. I've been with the organization for over 13 years. We've segmented our presentation here today, so you hear from all three of us. But I'm going to start off talking about the Public Project Revolving Fund, which is the New Mexico Finance Authority's flagship program that was created part and parcel when the New Mexico legislature created the organization itself back in 1992. As with a typical organization and program, it took a couple of years to get things formalized and to help kind of build the foundation for such, and we really started lending in 1995. So we've got about 25 years in terms of experience in lending through this program within New Mexico. Being a, thank you, John. Being a creature of the legislature, we do have some legislative processes that you'll hear, I think, a couple scenarios about during this presentation. But for the PPRF, one of the most significant requirements that we have to have is that we have to have legislative authorization for any of the entities who want to come to the program, the PPRF, to obtain a loan for $1 million or greater. It's a very simple process as far as submitting interest. Really, you just contact NMFA staff and you speak with a loan officer, and we'll determine whether your organization already has authorization, and if not, we'll put you on an upcoming legislative authorization bill that we sponsor each regular session each year. It's a fairly well-known bill throughout the session, and so it passes fairly easily, but it is a process that is, it's absolutely critical that you check that box in order to really move forward. So I do encourage everyone to talk with us to make sure that first step is done. Moving on to the program itself, over the 25 years, it's really grown tremendously, both not only in its capacity, but also with its reputation across the country, but also its credit ratings. Early on, when it was still developing a portfolio, it really didn't have much of a credit basis and was still kind of finding its way. But we currently find ourselves enjoying a AAA rating, both in our senior lien and subordinate lien from Standard & Poor's, and a AA1 from Moody's on the senior lien, and AA2 from Moody's on the subordinate lien. So what this translates into is really, with Wall Street and investors across the country, a well-rated, highly sought after pooled loan bond program, in which case the bonds we issue in the municipal bond space are very attractive and have a flight to quality. Over the past couple of years, we've really seen investors in the municipal bond space favor flight to quality, and we've seen that really benefit the program. And without getting too much into the bond mechanics, it's significant because it affects the ability. It raises capital for the program so that we can lend out, but it also drives pricing for the loans, which is very significant. Essentially, the program is structured so that essentially the AAA ratings that we get when we go to the market, we pass through to whoever our borrowers are, regardless of size or credit worthiness, so that basically everybody gets the same pricing. The PPR pricing is what it provides. It's a function of how far you go out on the yield curve, but essentially whether you're a small rural community in New Mexico or you're a mid to large municipal issuer in the state, ultimately you're treated with the same pricing structure. And we really don't premium price as a lot of banks do. When it perceives a higher risk, they'll charge more for taking on that risk. The PPR, by and large, really does not do that. It just, the pricing is transparent. One key significant factor in terms of how the PPRF goes about its credit analysis is that it relies on a pledge of an enduring revenue stream for security and coverage of the loan and to cash flow the loan. Ultimately, we see this a lot with different tax revenues, whether state taxes or local special taxes or just locally imposed gross receipts taxes, but also just typical enterprise revenues, whether it's water systems, wastewater systems, solid waste systems, but typical service being provided that is necessary, in which there's a high probability it will continue to be provided and generate revenue. It's a key, given this is an economic development platform and webinar, I'm trying to make this distinction as we've seen a lot of credits not meet the overall threshold or need to be credit enhanced with a typical enduring revenue because of the commercial or the commercial or that it could it could get interrupted or could go away. In terms of types of sizes of loans that the PPRF typically fields or has seen, it's got a very wide breadth in terms of what it can handle and what it has handled. We've seen loans for as little as $10,000 or less to loans to a single loan being above $100 million. So again, it's got a huge capability of addressing whatever size type of financing you're looking for, with the caveat that it's debt capacity driven by whoever the borrower is, and coverage driven based on the pledged revenue stream. So it is a capacity driven process with coverage and being an overall target. Having mentioned the attractive pricing that the PPRF enjoys when it goes to the market because of its high quality, the debt service reserves that it's built up, the large portfolio and management of the portfolio, the PPRF also provides an additional attractive and economic feature to the PPRF through disadvantaged funding. This is to help benefit communities in New Mexico who may be in an economically distressed area, or what we determine as an area that's below the median household income of what the state overall is. What this does is that basically we're able to provide a portion of the funding or all of the funding, depending on what the loan size is, at a fixed below market interest rate, either 0 or 2%, really synthetically drive down or subsidize the overall costs of the financing. So here on one hand, you get, just the pure market pricing being hugely attractive at AAA rated rates. You then get to blend or incorporate another portion of the loan at a further subsidized rate to achieve an overall lower cost for the overall financing. So with equipment loans, we provide up to $150,000 at one of the given two rates for those who qualify, and for infrastructure and building loans, you can achieve up to 10% of the overall loan at a disadvantaged funding, not to exceed $500,000 in any given year. So that equates to about a $5 million loan that would have $500,000 treated at a 0% or 2% interest rate, and then we'd blend the rest with the attractive market rates with whatever the market conditions are at the time of loan pricing. So the entities that qualify for PPRF are public in nature. Again, I do recognize the the spirit of this economic development webinar, but really the program was designed to hit that public element, being public projects. So local governments, state agencies, public schools, volunteer fire districts, tribal governments, higher ed, public school districts, and special districts and political subdivisions really all qualify for the PPRF. We also, as staff at NMFA, whether you move forward or alone or not, we charge a fee once the loan gets closed and booked. But up until then, we are instrumental in terms of helping communities out there really analyze their credit and debt capacity as it may pertain to some of our programs, loan structuring, and potential evaluation of refunding of already existing debt. As part of our fee as well, we do certain things that are required as part of the bond market that we've often find a lot of communities in New Mexico or bond issuers in New Mexico have a difficult time doing, especially at a cost that is as low as the fee that we're imposing. The municipal bond market's changed rather profoundly over the past several years, primarily since the kind of financial meltdown of 2008, wherein the SEC and the IRS more heavily regulate the municipal bond market, primarily, especially in the tax-exempt market. We've seen recent changes such as President Trump's tax bill doing away with advance refundings as well. So it continues to be highly regulated. Compliance is a huge issue. And one of the features that the PPRF provides is all of the arbitrage and rebate calculation requirements to make sure that those violations are not occurring, but also the document and records retentions that are always needed throughout the entire terms of the bonds, which could be anywhere from 20 to 30 years. And we'll have those stored readily available at any given time, which will be hugely important should anywhere down the line IRS audit a given bond series or transaction. You have to show compliance. So additionally, bond insurance and should an entity look to go somewhere else from the PPRF, it does show it can be cost effective to go to the PPRF, as pricing is the key determinant and credit rating is a key determinant when going to the bond market. Bond insurance continues to be limited, so there really is a flight to quality, and I think we've seen even more issuers turn to the PPRF, even though they can go to the bond market and get favorable rates. The attractiveness of the AAA rating and low cost of the PPRF, we've seen nudge out even highly rated mid to large issuers within New Mexico. The next slide really shows, and since the PPRF was created, the amount of funding that's gone out since it first started in 1995 or FY96, and you can kind of see how much it's grown over the last 25 years. Or very early on, we were still building a program, finding out how to do it, and we've seen the funding amounts going out to New Mexico communities continue to grow. Looking at slide 9, you kind of see what the last 4 years is, which is really the current market environment, current climate of the program, and what we find the new activity demand, a new normal for the program to be, wherein we see anywhere from about 90 to 100 different projects being funded, ranging from anywhere from about $250 to $300 million per year going out to New Mexico communities. So this is a significant fund to providing public infrastructure financing, both new money and refunding out to communities. So I think this is a significant chart showing that 4 consecutive years of some of the largest financial outputs from the fund.
Zach, what is on that previous slide, what is the disadvantaged funding?
So that amount in red is what I was alluding to earlier in terms of those communities who may be financially distressed as determined by the median household income. So that amount basically gets treated as with a subsidized below market interest rate, oftentimes 0% interest. So effectively, you largely just pay back the principal that you borrowed. But you can see here, over FY17 and 18, we did put about $12 million out per year in disadvantaged funding. So those that were kind of truly in need of that financial benefit. But moving forward, it's going to be more around the realm of $5 to $6 million that gets blended with the rest of the financing and really brings down costs, overall costs. Since over time, the PPRF's put out more than $3.4 billion in financing. Right now, we've got about a $1.5 billion outstanding balance sheet from funding that we've put out there. This on slide 10, this is really just a graphical breakdown of by category who's come to the fund and taken advantage of the fund. Municipalities have been the largest users of the fund, with about over $480 million still being outstanding, which is about 32% of our overall outstanding portfolio. Then followed by school districts, state agencies, counties, higher ed, tribal, and special political subdivisions. So although municipalities constitute the highest at about 32%, the rest are in the teens or single digits, sharing about very close percentages of having come to the fund and utilizing the fund. Looking at the same portfolio, but in terms of types of revenue streams that tend to secure a PPR financing and repay a PPR financing, the pie chart on slide 11 really shows that the most, the revenue that the PPR sees the most is gross receipts tax, general obligation bonds, and net system revenues of a given enterprise. So it could be a water system, wastewater system, joint utility. Just those 3 categories alone represent 75% of the loans that the PPRF sees. We do, while a little bit more of a profound statistic, we do in terms of number of loans, the most in fire and police loans, as they make up about 1/3 of total loans funded. But in terms of dollar amount, they don't represent too much, as police cars and fire trucks thankfully don't cost too much. to service in comparison to a lot of the projects that we fund. But we also see different local special taxes being lodgers tax, hospitality tax, gas tax, cigarette tax, and we've also done a couple of different appropriation type credits. So that really rounds out the larger buckets that we break down revenue types that secure the different loans. Speaking more to the spirit of this forum, economic development. I think we all know economic really cannot get done without the basic or non-basic public infrastructure that needs to be in place. So, almost every project that the PPR funds does have some economic development component to it or benefit to it. Some of the easier ones are just roads. We've seen an increase in communities taking on loans so that they can improve the roads and streets within its boundaries, partly because of I think decreased funding for roads, both state and federally, but also needs in terms of deferred maintenance. A lot in the Southeast Corridor and the oil and gas country, we've seen a lot of people do roads because of the economic development there and the need for roads to be good there. We've seen a lot of communities reinvest in itself in terms of quality of life projects, whether it's improvements to zoos or parks or aquatic centers and pools, trailways, all sorts of different things that improve the quality of life so that it can further attract businesses, retain businesses, and improve overall economic development. Public schools and, of course, higher ed. Education is key for economic development, not only for the families for which business are locating, but also in terms of the technical and vocational training that higher ed and schools can provide. We have seen a number of electric and broadband utility projects, which of course are needed. Solid waste infrastructure, police and fire safety, water and wastewater systems, and also just general property development on the public side, which is inclusive which does include commercial properties and industrial properties through special assessment districts and just similar type financing arrangements that the public puts in the infrastructure for. So all of these things are critical to kind of laying a foundation for economic development growth to occur and either attract or continue to facilitate businesses to operate as they need to. Going to the next slide, I'm providing some direct economic development projects in which the PPRF has participated in. We've done a number of industrial parks, which end up being, publicly owned industrial parks that they then lease out to private tenants, to business tenants. I mentioned early on that the PPRF is credit sensitive, being that it looks to a underlying pledged revenue stream that tends to be enduring. We don't have a long history nor a strong appetite for a lot of, say, lease revenues or underlying business revenues without some form of credit enhancement or we'll say guarantee to kind of supplement the overall security. So a lot of the industrial parks we've seen have either one or the other, or are dual pronged in terms of they may have pledged gross receipts tax and are recouping that GRT expense with the underlying lease revenues, or they're pledging both so that the lease revenues pays for the loan. But should the event the tenant goes out, then gross receipts tax would still be available, so there's no interruption to the loan debt servicing, and the risk is reduced from NMFA standpoint. Convention centers, we've done a number throughout the state, which they certainly have their own place within economic development and facilitating economic development. Various hospitals and healthcare facilities across the state, some large, some small and rural, Even something as unique as something as a municipality in the Eastern Plains having bought an assisted living facility by which it leases out to a private operator because it didn't want to see those jobs go away, and it also wanted to provide that service to its aging community. We have seen hotels come forward. They've been largely tribally owned, have to be non-gaming, but there is that eligibility. We've seen fairgrounds and rodeos come forward, which help drive some of the economic development for certain communities. Airports and also the spaceport have provided direct economic development. A couple communities have done museums or welcome centers, community centers as well, which is quite different from convention centers, but providing a place for your community to kind of get together. We've done golf courses that local governments have either purchased or continue to maintain. In some of many do such not because they want to be in the business, but they want to be able to continue to provide that quality of life. But also, it's important for the business community to have that available to them. We've also seen housing come forward, both through different teacherages for schools, but also we've seen municipalities start to look creatively about workforce housing and what they may be able to do there to help with its workforce and economic development as well too. The next slide really shows I've got 3 different lending officers that really travel the whole state and cover the whole state in terms of service. You can see here who they are and how to contact them. So should you have any questions, you want to bounce any ideas off of them, I highly encourage you do so. We largely cover a COG type environment, but certain loan officers are covering more than one, and it's not a perfect split. So with that, I feel I have gone on long enough. I can pause for any questions here, and if there are none, I'd be happy to pass it to my cohort, Michael Vonderheid.
There was one question. Do you offer technical, I guess the question is getting at, do you offer, what type of technical assistance, if any, do you offer communities or applicants?
Yeah, no, that's a good question, and we do it all the time. Again, we're a mission-based organization, and so we don't charge unless, especially in the PPRF, really the only way in which we receive any revenues is when we actually book a loan. We see all the time communities use us to get an idea of whether a financing need can work, how it could work, and then benchmark what we have to provide with something a bank down the street or the open market could provide, so that it can do its due diligence about what its options are and what the best solution for it is. So we provide technical assistance all the time in terms of what a loan could look like, different costs associated with it, what the pledged revenues may be, what the inner workings and cash flows may be, some of the upfront legal work that's required in terms of a local government's legal ability to undertake the project or what pledged revenue that it has. So we provide technical assistance on a daily basis, and really it's being a mission-based organization, it's largely what we're charged to do. It is somewhat biased in that we tend to focus on the products that we have to provide. We don't want to fill that municipal advisor or financial advisory role in which we're providing what could constitute as financial advice. And so we speak to the products that we have to offer and what we feel we could provide. So that's another area that is highly regulated across the state about what constitutes financial advice. And so I do want to put that out, that we do not serve in that role. But we do a lot of technical assistance. We do a lot of exploring in terms of refunding past debt or restructuring past debt versus laying a foundation moving forward, what we could potentially do with loan financing to meet your project needs.
That was it?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Michael Vonderheide, Director of Water Resources with the New Mexico Finance Authority. And just a little bit about me. I first came to New Mexico in 2005 from Los Angeles and worked at the Finance Authority as a senior program administrator for 5 years. Briefly left the state and went up to Washington State for about 18 months, but quickly came back as New Mexico had become home. And I worked for the Environment Department as a division director for 3 years. And then have been back at the Finance Authority in this position since 2016. And so this morning I wanted to talk about 3 programs that are administered in the Water Resources Department. We'll talk about project eligibility, kind of what projects these programs fund, the terms, who's eligible, as well as provide you some contact information for our programs. And I guess the first program we're going to talk about is the Water Trust Board. And the Water Project Finance Act created the 16-member Water Trust Board. It's a large board. It's comprising of, it's a very diverse board. And the Finance Authority administers the Water Trust Board. And we accept applications on an annual basis for projects to be funded from the Water Project Fund. The Water Trust Board then recommends a list of projects to the legislature. And this program requires legislative authorization for those projects to be funded from the Water Project Fund. In terms of prioritizing and what the board looks at with these projects, there is a local match requirement, so leveraging local and federal funds is important. There are 2-year construction periods, so the projects should be shovel ready. The projects should also meet urgent needs of the regional water plan, which are accepted by the ISC, and also assist in implementing the state water plan. Some of the parameters for Water Trust Board funding, as I mentioned, minimum contributions from the applicants, but it could be in the form of local or federal matching funds. There is a loan component to these projects. It is typically between 10% and 40%. That is for all entities that have a rate-paying constituency. We do try to size the awards that represents a full functional project or at least a standalone phase of a project. And the board looks for projects that can be completed within a year to 2 years from award. Related to how this program is financed, the Water Project Fund receives 9% on an annual basis of the senior severance tax bonds, and it also receives an annual distribution from the Water Trust Fund. And applicants that apply for one or more projects in a given cycle can only receive 15%. That is the max for a single project of the available funds in any year. I wanted to provide an application cycle overview. This is good timing for anybody that's interested in this program. Last month, we just completed the 2019 application cycle, and so we're tired. But there's no rest for the weary because we're working on our timelines for the 2020 application cycle. We haven't finalized the dates, but I have put the months on here. The notice of intent, which is really how this program gets started, that's going to be in August of this year. Our project applications, which go through Enable, which is our online system, are usually open through September through October for about 6 weeks or so. Then we'll be going to the Water Trust Board to recommend projects to the legislature in November. Of course, there'll be a bill for these projects in the next session. It is a 2-part application where we have a readiness application that comes later after the projects have been authorized by the legislature. That's through the January timeframe. We do have a compliance review, which goes through the Drinking Water Bureau, typically in the Office of the State Engineer, which again is in the spring. And then the expected Water Trust Board decision is in May. The Water Trust Board recommends the projects to the Finance Authority Board, who then approves the financial terms. So those were just completed in May last month, and 27 projects were awarded to the tune of $24.5 million. As I mentioned, the notice of intent is the first step in the application cycle. August 2019 is when this will open up. We'll have more information on that soon. What this does is it helps identify a primary contact who will be using our online application system. It tells us about what the project is, whether it meets urgent needs. It determines your interest in the funding. It also helps us find out who is going to be responsible for the application. The entity can complete the application, or a technical consultant can complete the application, but the primary contact from the entity is the one who needs to submit it. And again, the project application will be open probably in early September through potentially mid-October. That's when all the applications are due. We open up the Enable online application system to everybody who has submitted a notice of intent and told us about their project and given us proper contact information. These are the projects that are eligible. These are the project types, the categories. Water storage and conveyance or delivery, Endangered Species Act projects, watershed restoration and management, flood prevention, and also water conservation or treatment, recycling or reuse. And as a note, one application must be submitted for each proposed project. And again, I mentioned the application cycle. Our staff provides application trainings, which should be starting in mid-August. We typically do 3 trainings. We're working to finalize the dates and the locations of those trainings, but we try to do one in the north, one in Albuquerque, one in the south. So we'll have information on that soon in terms of when and where those trainings will be. But I would encourage anybody to attend those trainings, as they will start before the application actually opens in Enable, which would give you some better information on how that system works and also more information on the program itself. I wanted to note that each of our programs has a program email account. We have individuals working on these programs that have their own emails, but we do encourage folks to utilize these program email accounts, because we've got 2 and 3 people that have eyes on these accounts on a daily basis. And so in this case, WTBadmin@nmfa.net is the program account for the Water Trust Board. And moving on, the next program that we're going to talk about is the Local Government Planning Fund. It provides up to $50,000 in grant funds for planning documents. Communities can qualify for 2 grants per 24-month period, and that's not to exceed $100,000. We do base that 24-month period on the date that the planning grant closes, because that is when we fund the project. We will not fund a planning document until it's been approved by the reviewing agency. And so if you're out there and you're a community or a consultant that works with the community that needs to know kind of the timeline for your specific communities and when they would be eligible to come back, just let us know, and we'll be able to move forward. The good thing about this program is applications are accepted monthly. Again, we use Enable. That's how we're doing everything in water resources. That's our online application system. I want to talk about some of the eligible entities for this program, which is almost everybody, but municipalities and counties, mutual domestic water consumers associations, all public water associations, co-ops, irrigation districts, Indian nations, tribes, or pueblos, as well as agencies or institutions of the state are the eligible entities for the Local Government Planning Fund. The next slide, which is number 29, is a list of some of the eligible planning documents. These are the 8 documents that we see most often. preliminary engineering reports, environmental information documents, asset management plans, water conservation plans, comp plans, LEDA plans, as well as Metropolitan Redevelopment Act plans, and finally economic development feasibility studies. There are a few other eligible plans. The reason I've highlighted these is because we have approved reviewing agencies that use guidance documents in order to review these plans and approve them. And so we do typically require a scope of work to help us evaluate an application that we would then provide to the reviewing agency, just to let us know that it's a feasible project, it's a necessary project, is it addressing any urgent needs, just so that we have sign off from the reviewing agency to help us evaluate these proposed plans. If you have a plan that is not on this list, let us know. We would ask for a scope of work. We're open to the idea of working with different reviewing agencies. Typically, we work with the Environment Department, Economic Development, of course, as well as the Office of the State Engineer. But if you have a plan that doesn't necessarily fit with the policies, we can certainly take a look at it. But a scope of work would be needed for us to provide it to a reviewing agency and see if it's something that we can make work. Now, the next slide is some terms and qualifiers and things that we do. The first thing that we do is a cash test, unmet need. We review your financials and budgets. We want to make sure that no more than half of your total expenditures are available in cash to fund your own planning document. And really what we're looking at here is just to see what your unrestricted cash balances are. Some of you might know Susan Rodriguez. She works for us now. She worked for DFA for over 20 years in the budget division, and she does the analysis and works on the applications for these programs. So she reviews those financials and budgets, and will work with you and let you know what she sees there. We think it's a fairly generous way to make you eligible for these planning documents, but again, we'll work with you based on what you provide. $50,000 again is the max award. That is if you were to receive 100% grant funds. The first thing we do is look at MHI. That's kind of our first qualifier. Most everything we do is based on the average of the state and in comparison to what the MHI of the local community is, or the local water rates in comparison to the state average water rates. We've got a couple charts here that those are the numbers that we're using currently for MHI and for water rates and wastewater rates. It's based on 6,000 gallons. Those are residential rates. And we use the MHI and the local burden test to come up with how much grant funds you would qualify for, and then what the local match requirement might be in the case of your particular project. The next slide, local match waivers. I mentioned the local match as part of the program, but we do have a variety of ways to waive the local match requirement, and we will work with you on that. The first is really more related to infrastructure projects and urgent needs, but projects that have been, that cure regulatory compliance issues that would be cited by the Environment Department or EPA would be something that would be an urgent need. That would help you. That would help us waive the local match requirement for you. And others are really public health threats, things that are in response to things like wildfires, flood and drainage issues, things that are health and safety concerns and issues that if you can document them, dam safety projects certainly, and then other things I mentioned, wildfires, conditions brought on by unforeseeable calamity. We've certainly had planning documents and preliminary engineering reports that are in response to wildfires where the water system has been compromised and a PER is necessary to evaluate what can be done to make the water system safe going forward. The next slide is also local match waivers, but this is specific to declining economic development. So we talked about LEDA plans and Metropolitan Redevelopment Act plans. Those would really be exempt from the local match requirement altogether. And so those are popular plans within this program because normally we can work to get those to qualify for the maximum grant award of $50,000. There are some other qualifiers here for small cities, small counties that have experienced a decline of GRT over the past 24 months, or entities that have experienced the loss of a major employer in the last year. And what we can use for certain mutual domestics and small water systems is those that don't have GRT authority and they have less than 250 connections. So we've certainly had a number of mutual domestics that fall under that category, which allowed us to waive the local match requirement if they didn't on their face, qualify for the $50,000. The next slide, talking about applications. They are accepted monthly through our Enable Online system. We have updated our website recently to include the enrollment form for this program. It is available on our website. It's under other programs, the Local Government Planning Fund. You got to dig for it a little bit. But it's simply a two-page document that identifies who you are, what type of planning document you're interested in, and allows us to get you enrolled in the Enable system so that you can have access to the application. As I mentioned earlier, the primary contact is somebody from the entity, but you can assign technical consultants as well to assist you in completing that application, and that is something that is done quite regularly. So you can find the enrollment form on our website. Please return it, a completed form, to lgpf@nmfa.net. Again, that's the email program account for this particular program. We've got 3 of us working on it. I have listed the contacts below. I mentioned earlier Susan Rodriguez works on the applications and will do the financial analysis to see what your proposed planning grant qualifies for. Mary Finney typically works on the project after board approval. When the project is approved by the board, we'll send you an award letter that kind of outlines some deadlines, and Mary will work with you and the reviewing agency to make sure that you're meeting those deadlines. Typically 5 months in after board approval, we ask that you have a consultant on board to complete the document. Within 12 months, we would expect that a draft planning document's been submitted to the reviewing agency. By 15 months, we expect that the reviewing agency would have been satisfied and has approved the document. That allows us to close the planning grants. After that, we have 18 months from the date of board approval to close and fund these grants. So Mary is there to help you through that post-award. And we really do try to keep those within an 18-month time frame. The last program I want to talk about is the Drinking Water State Revolving Loan Fund. This is a federal program. It offers low-cost financial assistance to water systems throughout the state. This is pretty nuts and bolts in terms of the type of infrastructure that it funds, but it's repair and replacement of drinking water infrastructure. There is a compliance piece where we would like to ensure compliance with federal and state drinking water regulations. The goal of the program is really to protect water quality through safe drinking water. And the program is jointly administered by the Finance Authority as well as the Environment Department. And it is the Drinking Water Bureau that we work with at the Environment Department to administer this program. Again, on the next slide, I mentioned this is a federal funding source through EPA. That means that there's federal regulations involved. That means that the loan fund is subject to annual grants that we receive from EPA. So there's how much funds will be available, what are the priorities in that given year. The program does offer subsidy, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. Some of the major federal requirements that the program comes with are environmental reviews. We have a NEPA-like process that we work with our entities and a outside consultant to make sure that we're in compliance with that. Some of the construction requirements are American Iron and Steel, Davis-Bacon Wage Act, as well as disadvantaged business or DBE subcontractors that you've got to be, you have to solicit DBE subs. And of course, a federal single audit, which would be required should you have over $750,000 in a given year of expenditures for this program. That's a lot of requirements to deal with, so I need to mention some of the advantages of the program. There is a broad eligibility in terms of the projects that we can fund. We have low interest rates, they're 0 to 2%. We offer subsidy in the form of principal forgiveness on these loans. I'll talk a little bit about how those things qualify, but we have 25% to 75% principal forgiveness available to projects that are construction projects for drinking water systems. We do accept funding requests year-round. We have an annual fundable list. We have a fall fundable list and a spring fundable list that have different time frames. We do provide technical assistance to applicants that are unsuccessful the first time around. The technical assistance is provided generally by the Drinking Water Bureau up front to make sure that systems have capacity, technical, managerial, financial capacity in order to take on a loan and execute a project that's in compliance with the federal regulations. We've got some seasoned veterans who have worked on this program for a while, and so we feel we've got a high level of customer service with this program. We do understand that the federal regulations can be a bit of a hindrance, but again, we're here to work with you on those. Eligible systems and eligible types of projects. We primarily deal with public water systems. You would have a PWS number. Whether they are privately or publicly owned community water systems, they would be eligible. We deal with a federal regulation of public water, definition of public water systems. It also includes nonprofit or non-community public water systems. And again, I would refer eligibility to the Environment Department's Drinking Water Bureau in terms of specific water systems and if they fit that definition. The eligible project types for this program, new and replacement sources, so wells, treatment, transmission and distribution lines, storage tanks, meters, any infrastructure that's needed to regionalize water systems. We certainly this program is a proponent of regionalizing. I want to mention disadvantaged systems on the next slide. And I wanted to put this on here because I want to just highlight that we do have a disadvantaged community assistance program that's associated with the Drinking Water State Revolving Loan Fund. This criteria we have proposed changes to, and it went out for public comment with our intended use plan, and that public comment period is ended, so we're very close to, I guess, simplifying what you see here, but I'll review it. We do look at community median household income. We did have an affordability ratio that looked at annual average user charges over MHI. Again, we're working on a proposal to simplify this where MHI only of a community would be our criteria to meet a disadvantaged system or a severely disadvantaged system. All this information is in our intended use plan, and I'll talk about that in a few slides, but I did want to highlight that disadvantaged systems are a big part of this program. They are available for enhanced loan terms, and I'll talk about on the next slide some of the interest rates and terms that we currently have for the program, which is a public disadvantaged system would receive a 0% interest rate. A public non-disadvantaged system would receive a 2% interest rate. Our private systems that are out there, a nonprofit system would be 3%, a for-profit would be 4%. We don't often see private for-profit loans. We primarily see public loans through this program at a 0% to 2% interest rate. Currently, our loan repayment periods are up to 20 years for this program. There is a 2-year construction period similar to the Water Trust Board where principal payments are not due during those 2 years. They would be due after project completion, or if your project takes less than 2 years, you'd receive a final debt service schedule, and then you'd move into repaying the loan. Our severely disadvantaged systems can qualify for repayment periods up to 30 years. And again, there's been some changes, amendments to the Safe Drinking Water Act that we have recently addressed through our proposed changes to the disadvantaged community assistance program, as well as our affordability criteria that would take any eligible project a loan repayment period up to 30 years. Severely disadvantaged would remain up to 30 years, but even non-disadvantaged communities then could potentially go up to 30 years following a 2-year construction period. And I want to talk about the subsidy a little bit that's part of this program on the next slide. It is determined annually by EPA. We are required to deliver a certain amount of subsidy in the form of principal forgiveness on an annual basis. Here's the breakdown. All construction projects would receive 25% subsidy. Disadvantaged systems, another 25%. So if you have a construction project and you're a disadvantaged system, you're looking at 50% principal forgiveness. If you had $1 million project, you'd only be responsible to pay back $500,000 as far as the loan goes. Severely disadvantaged systems, you would add another 25%, which would take you to 75% for a construction project. So pretty favorable enhanced terms for our disadvantaged communities out there. We haven't proposed any changes to those subsidy percentages through our affordability criteria and disadvantaged community assistance program. These will remain the same in the coming fiscal year. Now, how do you get this money? The first thing we do, we have a priority list that's developed by the Environment Department's Drinking Water Bureau. They publish a comprehensive list, which is everybody who submits a project interest form, and then a fundable priority list of those that meet that technical, managerial, and financial capacity that I mentioned earlier. The first step in applying for these funds is to submit a project interest form, which is available on the Environment Department's website under the Drinking Water Bureau's webpage. You'll find the project interest form there. NMED is your first stop in terms of having them evaluate your capacity to be part of this program and whether or not you would be able to move forward. Some of the criteria in terms of the fundable list, I mentioned the managerial and technical capacity. Financial ability of the system to repay the loan. NMFA assists the Environment Department with those determinations. But we would expect that a project is ready to proceed within 6 months, so that perhaps you've completed a preliminary engineering report, that you've done some planning on your project, which allows us to move forward to construction within 6 months, 8 months really at the max. We'd be looking at doing your environmental review within those first 6 months. So it's kind of imperative to be successful in this program that you've done some planning prior to coming to the program for construction dollars. The next slide, which is slide 42, the eligible projects are ranked on that fundable priority list, as I mentioned. The Drinking Water Bureau has project ranking criteria, which they use to score projects for inclusion on the fundable list. There's 6 categories that are involved there: source water vulnerability, compliance with the Safe Drinking Water Act, affordability, whether there's a regionalization component to your project, water efficiency, as well as sustainability. Those are the 6 categories by which the Drinking Water Bureau will evaluate your proposed projects. Again, funding is allocated to the projects on the fundable priority list. We take them in the order they are ranked. The fundable priority list is published annually. It is getting close to being finalized for state fiscal year 2020. And that brings me to the next slide, which is talking about our intended use plan, which we publish every year. We published ours in May this year. We did have a comment period for that because we had those proposed changes to our affordability and disadvantaged systems. The intended use plan looks at, it lets you know what the interest rates are, the terms, and the subsidy. It gives you the priority ranking criteria that I mentioned earlier, and of course includes the annual fundable priority list. So we're going to be finalizing that document next week by July 1 for 2019 for state fiscal year 2020, as it has already gone through a public comment period and EPA has reviewed the document. But I will mention that all the funds will not be utilized on this annual list. There will be a fall list as well, and project interest forms are due on August 1st for that fall list. We will have additional funds available. We will have additional subsidy available for the fall list and potentially the spring fundable list. So there's still opportunities for this state fiscal year to apply and be ranked on a fundable list to move forward with your project during state fiscal year 2020. And I would encourage anyone to take a look at that intended use plan. It is on our website. It is on the NMED's website. It was posted for 30 days. We'll be finalizing it next week. And so I think it's a good way to learn a little bit more about the program. Again, the Drinking Water State Revolving Loan Fund has its own program email account, which is dw@nmfa.net. And Todd Johansson is our senior program administrator. He's been working on this program for, I believe, 6 or 7 years now. So he's really a subject matter expert in terms of this program. And so I believe that is my last slide. And if there's any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer them.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. You can type questions in the right hand of your screen. Feel free to go ahead. And I don't see any right now. I think that was a lot of information. That was great. So if you want to go ahead and get started, John.
Okay.
And as those questions come to you, feel free to type them in, and we'll get them at the end of the presentation.
Sure. Before I get started, I want to introduce myself. My name is John Brooks. I'm the Director of Commercial Lending at the New Mexico Finance Authority. And a little bit about myself. I've been at the Finance Authority for now over 15 years. I started off in the public lending department, working with Zach on various projects that we encountered. And then there was an opportunity that came available in the private lending department as they created this department to spur on economic development in the state of New Mexico through some of the programs that we created. So in this department, I'm going to talk about 4 different programs. 2 of which are community facilities programs, which are the primary care and behavior health capital fund programs. And then also some of our economic development financing programs, such as smart money and new market tax credits. And so as we go through this last portion of the presentation, we'll learn about how the Finance Authority has been able to help the state of New Mexico with economic development and also and participate in the furthering of attracting new businesses and attracting new community facilities throughout the state of New Mexico. So in terms of community facilities, what we talk about in community facilities, those are facilities that are used by everyone, such as primary care facilities or behavioral health facilities throughout the state of New Mexico. The 2 programs that we have dedicated for these particular needs are Primary Care Capital Fund and the Behavioral Health Capital Fund, which are 2 programs which are very similar in nature in the way that we are able to deliver the funds at low cost of capital, and also the way we manage the programs with other agencies. So starting with the Primary Care Capital Fund, and I want to talk about a project first. The Primary Care Capital Fund project that we that is displayed here is the Mesilla Valley Hospice financing that we did in Las Cruces, New Mexico. We provided $2 million to expand this hospice in Las Cruces, which needed to take on additional rooms for the aging population in New Mexico, and also provide a way of having a respectable end of life care in southern New Mexico. So this facility, what they did was an expansion and renovation of the current hospice facility, which allowed them to not only add on more rooms for hospice care, but also for assisted living facilities. This project was a successful project in the way that they were able to pay off the loan earlier because there is no prepayment penalties in this particular program. And the interest rate that was delivered was 3% for the life of the loan, so it's fixed for the life of the project. A little bit more about the primary care capital fund. As you will see, it allows for the finance authority to work with nonprofit entities throughout the state of New Mexico that provide primary care capital access to all residents in the state of New Mexico. And what we do is fund capital projects such as equipment, building renovations, building construction, anything that is deemed capital projects. Also, purchase of land and any other capital project. I know I just repeated myself there. In terms of eligible entities, the eligible entities include community-based nonprofit primary care clinics or hospice or any rural or other health care underserved areas of the state. So any primary care that's located in a major metropolitan area but then is considered underserved can qualify. We just recently expanded the definition of eligibility of clinics this year in the 2019 legislative session by allowing public bodies who own primary care facilities to also apply to these funds. As I mentioned earlier, the loan terms on the interest rates are 3% fixed for the life of the loan. We cannot exceed 20 years on infrastructure projects. We could do 30 years on building financing. Equipment loans we may not exceed 10 years. Now, clients can get a principal forgiveness component if they qualify for a contract for services agreement. This agreement is an agreement that they enter into with the Department of Health, who will certify that they provided primary care services to indigent patients throughout their region. So what typically happens is the Department of Health will enter into contract with the entity. That entity will send their results to the Department of Health. The Department of Health will certify that that entity met their agreement and send the finance authority the approved agreement on a quarterly basis. And so what that does is that reduces the interest rate, the payments on each loan on a monthly basis of 20%. So we will reduce the principal and interest 20% based on their ability to provide services to those that are deemed indigent throughout the state of New Mexico. The next program that I want to talk about is Behavioral Health Capital Fund. The project that I have listed is the Solid Rape Crisis Center that we worked with here in Santa Fe. And this was a refinancing of a portion of their building and also did an expansion of their facility. The Solace Rape Crisis Center is a behavioral health care clinic that does trauma care. They also help with those young kids and families that experience trauma in their family. And also they deal with work with the city of Santa Fe and their police department on rape scenarios, and also anyone is suffering any type of behavioral health care trauma. So we were able to provide $480,000 worth of funds at a 3% interest rate to expand that particular clinic. In the Behavioral Health Capital Fund, we work with HSD and specifically in the Behavioral Health Collaborative on this particular program to help again with low-cost financing for infrastructure and capital projects. At one time, the eligible entity was any nonprofit behavioral health provider less than that had assets less than $10 million. In 2019, again, we approached the legislative body and passed legislation to expand the eligibility to include public bodies that own behavioral health care facilities. And we also eliminated the $10 million asset limit because we recognize that a lot of clinics have more than $10 million of assets, and they would eliminate themselves with that asset size. Also, again, the loan terms on this program, again, is fixed at 3% and have the same terms that are in the primary care capital fund, where 20-year terms on building, 10-year terms on equipment. And then also there is a contract for services where we provide up to 20% forgiveness on principal and interest payments on these type of loans. And so these are the two community services projects or programs that we offer at the Finance Authority that help out with primary care needs throughout the state of New Mexico and behavioral health needs throughout the state of New Mexico. The next portion of our presentation is on economic development financing and how the Finance Authority is able to provide statewide economic development financing throughout the state of New Mexico. And what's unique about these programs is we're able to use public-private partnerships in order to deliver economic development financing throughout the state. In order to do that, the first thing we had to do in 2003 was pass the Statewide Economic Development Finance Act. This act alone allows the Finance Authority to take public monies to lend it to private businesses in order to finance private ventures throughout the state of New Mexico. In this particular program, we created the Economic Development Revolving Loan Fund, which buys participations in from various banks into two sub-accounts. One which has state funds and the other which has federal funds. To date, we've operate the Smart Money program, which is the state portion of the loan participation. And then from 2011 to 2018, we operated a program called the Collateral Support Participation Program, in which we use federal dollars to deliver participations throughout the state of New Mexico. The Statewide Economic Development Finance Act at one point required that the Finance Authority take legislation to the state legislative process on an annual basis, but we were able to temporarily suspend that originally in 2011, and the current suspension will end. And actually, we extended that, and the current suspension will end in 2023. So therefore, by doing that, that makes the Finance Authority more business friendly to help out financing projects at a more periodic basis instead of waiting to legislative process to get financing approved. So starting with our Smart Money program, which is a loan participation program, we have done several loans throughout the state of Mexico using this particular financing. The one that you see before you is the one we worked with Family and Youth Inc., in which they was the owner of this building, which they leased out to New America Schools. The loan amount which we took out was $1,078,000 in a 49% participation with Century Bank, located in Las Cruces, New Mexico. And this particular project, what they did was purchase the building in downtown Las Cruces and convert the building into a new charter school that was designed to provide educational tools and support for diverse population of immigrants that came into the Las Cruces area. The biggest benefit of this was this charter school was able to provide a benefit to the underserved population and provide educational benefits, not only in terms of the families that the kids that attend the school, but also their families, and being able to get the necessary education to work in the state of New Mexico, and also to become a citizen through their citizenship program that they have at New America schools. Smart Money itself, in terms of a participation program, we work with not only the Economic Development Department to solicit loans, but we also work with our banking partners throughout the state of New Mexico to finance local projects throughout the state of New Mexico. Some of the eligible projects that we do are land financing, building, equipment, and working capital, and also lines of credits, which I inadvertently did not insert in this presentation. The loan participation is designed to fill in financing gaps that that may be existed when you're going through your financing structure with the banks. Or it also minimizes some of the risk that the banks will take on in terms of loans throughout this and throughout the business community here in the state. So how we operate the program is NMFA purchases participation in business loans that's originated by banks, and then the banks service the loan, and we work as a partner with the bank in the financing. The New Mexico Finance Authority operates behind the scene. The bank relationship with the small business or the business itself is maintained, and therefore the Finance Authority partner is with the bank. With our participation, we noticed that the interest rates that we provide are lower than the bank's rates, and therefore provide the borrower a lower interest rate that they would receive at just going through a bank partnership. Also, from the bank standpoint, we minimize some of the risk that they have with the partnership or in the financing that they have in the borrower itself. Now, in terms of smart money, the one thing we do require is we require for every $50,000 of money that we lend out, we expect one job being created in the financing. So if you borrow $200,000, then we expect 4 jobs to be created as a result of our financing within that particular transaction. To date, the Finance Authority has lent out over $6 million in the Smart Money program, and we have about $1.6 million available to lend out for participations. The next program that I want to talk about is the New Market Tax Credit program, which is a program that we are very active in throughout the state of New Mexico. One particular project that I want to focus on real quick is the Continental Divide Electric Co-op Broadband Project. We invested $15 million of allocation into 2 different phases of this particular broadband project. They're providing broadband into Grant, Milan, San Rafael, and Blue Water portion of central New Mexico. And what they did was unique, and they created their own leveraged loan in the financing. And our investor in this particular transaction is Wells Fargo Community Investment Holdings. So Wells Fargo is using one of their community investment holdings to invest in this particular project. And so with this particular financing, those communities will receive high-speed internet access. What they are providing is 50 megabytes up and down in terms of the speed to that particular area, and so that serves and helps develop rural broadband services throughout the rural parts of New Mexico in that immediate area. CDC is looking to expand their services, and they have started with the more densely developed areas of their revenue of their customer base, and then they will expand out from there. So as of right now, in terms of community benefit, there's approximately 2,400 homes that will have access to broadband services throughout that portion of the state. So why new market tax credits, and why does New Mexico Finance Authority get involved with new market tax credits? Well, new market tax credits is an economic development tool to entice investors to invest in a project that they normally would not invest in, especially those projects that are located in low-income census tracts. So the new market tax credit program, what it does, it incentivizes those investors who invest in these census tracts with tax credits. Those tax credits they can write off over a 7-year period, and that 7-year period is our compliance period for a particular loan. Now, the tax credits are sold, and those proceeds from the sale of the tax credits will be delivered as a loan to the borrowers in a transaction. To date, Finance New Mexico, which is the entity which New Mexico Finance Authority created to run this program, to date we have financed over $246 million of tax credit projects and allocations through 23 awards, and just recently received another $40 million of allocation, and we'll start accepting applications in July for the $40 million. So how does the program work in a little bit more detail? The new market tax credits typically funds about 20 to 25% of the project once it's paired with the leveraged sources of funds. So in other words, when you sell the tax credits, it brings 25% of your sources of funds needed for your project. It doesn't fund the total project, but it does give you the necessary funds to fill in that gap that you may have in terms of your financing. In order to calculate how much you will receive in terms of the tax credits, what you'll do is take an allocation, for example, of $10 million, and you times it by 39 cents, which is the equivalent of $3.9 million, and then you times it by 82 cents, and that's how much you will receive in terms of the amount of money into your project. As I indicated, the tax credit will be used over 7 years. The first 3 years at 6% or at 5%, and then the remaining 4 years at 6%. In our subsidiary entity, the Finance New Mexico is a certified CDE. So that's the CDE that New Mexico Finance Authority created. Finance New Mexico is structured as a managed LLC, so with New Mexico Community Capital. So what that means is the Finance Authority works with New Mexico Community Capital as the ownership of Finance New Mexico. New Mexico Finance Authority owns 99% of the entity, and New Mexico Community Capital owns 1%. Under the Articles of Organization, New Mexico Finance Authority is the sole manager, and then New Mexico Community Capital is a passive manager in the program. The next page is the map of the eligible census tracts throughout the state of New Mexico. The areas that are highlighted in yellow are not eligible areas. The ones that are in dark blue are eligible areas. The areas that are in gray has insufficient data. So what you would need to do is contact staff in order to drill down and determine if that area is eligible. Some of the eligible projects in the New Market Tax Credit Program is we could do office space, retail and office, mixed use housing and commercial development, entertainment, theaters, museums, grocery stores, nonprofit organizations such as primary care, hospitals, behavioral health care facilities, Also, we have done hotel, industrial parks, and manufacturing, operating business, renewable energy, and healthcare. So in terms of new market tax credit, it does have a wide-ranging breadth of eligible projects. We have, I believe we have touched in every area that except for the mixed-use housing requirement. And the reason we haven't is because it is difficult to do a mixed-use project where you would have at least 30% commercial revenues along with 70% housing revenues. And typically we do see those in other areas that do these type of projects, like on the East Coast or the West Coast, where they have denser populations. But in New Mexico, we haven't done those as of right now. In terms of economic impact criteria and how we look for scoring each individual project, we receive applications on a quarterly basis, and when we rank each individual project, it's based on these 6 different areas. Number 1, community impact and support. That gets 20 points, which deals with quality of life, environmental impact, and targeted industry and downtown redevelopment. The next area is job creations. So how many jobs are you creating, retaining? Secondary and tertiary jobs, construction jobs. Are these jobs high wage? And also, do you provide employee benefits? Number 3, applicant need and readiness. So is that in terms of financial soundness, is this project a viable and financially sound project? The but-for test deals with, without the new market tax credits, can you get this project completed? The project readiness, is this ready to move forward? Can we move forward within the next 6 months with this particular project? And then also the qualified management of the businesses that are running, or the qualified management team that's running the business. The next area is business location. That gets to, is it in a area of high distress or is it a rural project? And then finally, economic export-based companies. So do they derive most of their monies outside of the state of New Mexico? And then new capital investment. Are we invested in new buildings within the state of New Mexico? The next portion is how does the new market tax credit work, and how do we determine the proceeds that you will receive in your project? If you look at the math starting on the left-hand side of the slide, and if you have a $10 million allocation and you times that by 39%, because the tax credit rate that you're getting on the $10 million allocation is 39%, the total tax credits that will be awarded for a project is $3.9 million. So the investor will receive $3.9 million in a $10 million allocation. Once the investor pays for that $3.9 million, which he at a discounted rate of 82 cents per dollar, the amount of money that is monetized and it's going to be awarded to a project is $3.1 million. And then what we estimate in legal costs is about $775,000. And then so the net money that is going to the project is $2,423,000. And then that money is aligned in your project sources of funds. So on the left-hand or the right-hand side of the slide, what you see is your capital campaign, the monies that you have raised through any capital campaign. If you got any state grants, so any philanthropic funds or any local grants or any other grants that you may be able to receive, along with the tax credit proceeds, gives you the total project of $9.4 million that you could use for a $9.5 million project cost. So in other words, what we're saying is that allocation of tax credits does not equate to the amount of cash that you're receiving. So just because you receive $10 million of allocation, it does not mean you're receiving $10 million worth of money. This next slide is an indicative of a sampled transaction diagram. And so, as you can see, it flows through all the monies that we talked about in the previous slide. But the one thing I didn't point out, and the one thing that is key to the new market tax credit, is if you look at the bottom of the slide where there is a red bubble pointing to the $3.1 million that you receive from the tax credit investor, that is the monies that is going to be forgiven at the end of the 7-year compliance period. So once the tax credits have been used. So what that means in a $10 million transaction or a $9 million transaction, approximately $3 million of the money will be forgiven and will not have to be repaid. So this is why a lot of people traditionally like the new market tax credit program, because of the forgiveness component that is available to a borrower in a transaction. So some of the benefits of the new market tax credit, again, you know, the transactions are very complex, but the benefits you receive are, number one, you get capital to finance your projects. It fills temporary financing gaps. Also, it is delivered at low cost of money. So, although it's not a grant, the loans that we give are at 2%. The terms of the loans are flexible. And then also at the end of the compliance period, the loan is canceled out in terms of the principal forgiveness. In terms of community benefits, what we have seen is there's been an increase in tax base. There has been a removal of blight because of some of the renovation and redevelopment in those areas. There's also been a direct correlation to job creation, construction jobs, and indirect job creation. Also, it's helped attract and retain skilled workforce, bring new goods and services to underserved communities, and then also the capital investment in underserved and qualified low-income communities. So with that is the new market tax credit portion of the presentation. As you can see, here's our contact information. We also utilize a group email at nmtc@nmfa.net or business@nmfa.net. So with that, I believe we all stand for questions on the presentation.
Great, thank you, John. If you have questions, you can go ahead and type them into the questions box that you should see on the right hand of your screen. But honestly, that was really extensive from all of the presenters. I'm really impressed. That was like a significant course in all the programs that you offer. So we did get one question about, let's see, are the municipalities eligible for the Water Resources Department programs aside from the LGPF?
Yes.
Yes, they are. Okay. And that was, Shannon was asking that question. So really straightforward question. I don't see a lot of questions. So do you have any follow-up information you want to share? I think that covered. That was the technical side of it, eligibility. That was a lot of information. So I think this will be good to put it on YouTube so people can refer to this moving forward. I think that was great. I'm not seeing any questions. Of course, we will send this presentation out. So you'll have all of the contacts with NMFA. And I did want to share, these are some upcoming events that we have going on in the department. The Fund It meeting, the next one will be August 27th, and the cutoff application is on the 17th. We'll have to double check those dates, but just keep in mind that that's coming up in August, and you can go to our website. You can apply on our website. The next webinar that we'll do will be July 22nd, and SBA will be that's Small Business Administration. We'll be talking about their programs and resources for small businesses. As mentioned, our commercial funded event will be in Taos. That will be the Small Business Finance Fair. So if you are a small business in the North Central region, you can connect with lenders and business resource providers. We'll probably have another one in Central New Mexico in the fall. So stay tuned for that. We are planning an Opportunity Zones Forum August 29th. And that'll be in Albuquerque, and that'll be open to the public to attend and receive information and education on the state's initiative. And we're actively enrolling lenders and projects into the credit assistance program. And that's about it. You can find our contact information here. These are our regional reps and our New Mexico Main Street program, which are great resources. Our regional reps can connect you with NMFA. Here's the New Mexico Economic Development Finance Development Team's contact. And I did get a request from Ray to send the webinar out, and as mentioned, the presentation and the webinar link will get sent out to everyone that registered. So again, I want to thank NMFA and everyone that presented. Thanks for your time and your information. That was fantastic. That was great. And thanks for tuning in, and we will see you around. Contact us if we can help in any way. Thanks so much.